Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Global Forum for Responsible Recruitment. My name's Neil Wilkins. I'm head of the Migrant Workers Programme at the Institute for Human Rights and Business. So responsible recruitment is usually viewed as one of the actions that companies should undertake as part of their strategies to prevent modern slavery in their operations and extended supply chains. There are, however, good reasons beyond preventing modern slavery why we might wish to see more responsible practices when it comes to migrant worker recruitment. And in this session, we're keen to discover the importance of migrant workers to the global economy and their impact on GDP in both countries of origin and destination. We're also keen, however, to discuss the lost development potential if migrant remittances have to be used to service recruitment debt. And earlier this year, IHRB produced a short report called Realising Rights, Maximising Benefits on this very subject. But today, we're very fortunate to have two expert speakers with us to share their own experience and views. In a career spanning 3 decades, Dilip Ratha has undertaken pioneering work on remittances, migration, and innovation in finance. And Dilip is now the lead economist for migration and remittances, social protection and jobs at the World Bank, where he is also the head of Nomad, and that's the part of the World Bank dedicated to migrant worker remittances. He's the founder of the Nomad Migrating Out of Poverty research program and the African Institute of Remittances. And then Dr. Tasneem Siddiqui is a professor of political science at the University of Dhaka, Bangladesh, and she was the founding chair of the Refugee and Migratory Movements Research Unit, RUMRU. And RUMRU were one of the key organisations who engaged with IHRB when we originally developed the Dhaka Principles for Migration with Dignity, which we launched in partnership with them in Dhaka just over 10 years ago now. It doesn't seem so long, but 10 years ago now. And since then, the Dhaka Principles have become a well-respected framework now used by a range of stakeholders, including many businesses, to understand the challenges faced by migrant workers and those who recruit and employ them at all stages of the migration cycle. Tasneem's own output on the subject of migration and development is prolific and will be familiar to anyone who has spent any time researching the subject. So with two such eminent academic speakers for our discussion today, my own CSE in woodwork is looking a little lightweight, but I will try to keep up. First of all, Dilip, the World Bank and Nomad is active in estimating and highlighting remittances globally. What sort of amounts are we talking about here?
Well, the amount of money sent by migrants to their friends and families and friends rather, which is what we call remittances or migrant remittances, reached over $600 billion last year. This is only the flows going to low and middle income countries. And usually people are sending migrants are sending $50, $100, $200 per month. And in the end, roughly 200 million migrants are sending money every month, and it adds up to more than $600 billion. This year, 2022, we expect remittances to exceed $630 billion. And at that level, remittances are now larger than foreign direct investment flowing through all the multinational companies to all the low and middle income countries. Remittances are more than 3 times the size of total official aid globally. And if you exclude China from the list of low and middle income countries, the remittance flows actually are larger than the sum of foreign direct investment and official aid. And they have been so for last 7 years now.
And even with COVID, was there a tightening of the global economy that we're seeing at the moment? Has that impacted on the current situation?
Yes, it did impact the flow of remittances, but surprisingly, even as the flow of migration became zero or negative, somewhat negative because of travel bans mostly and the closure of businesses all over the world, the flow of remittances did not become negative, did not become the growth did not become negative. The flow of remittances did not decline. We were expecting a 20% decline in our report in April 2020, when the lockdown begins, remember, in all earnest all over the world, in March 2020, the beginning of COVID. In April 2020, we were expecting that remittance flows would decline significantly, like never before. And looking back at the data for 2020, it seems there was actually a 1% increase. So yes, remittances were impacted because people couldn't work, but that was only for 1 quarter. And after that, they started recovering and ended the year only a little lower than before. The following year, 2021, there was actually a 7% growth in remittance flows. And this year, we are expecting another 3 to 4% increase. So we are basically looking at a flow that has a type of financial flow to developing countries that seems to be highly resilient, unexpectedly so. And it continues to increase even as other types of resource flows are actually declining and they're gyrating up and down. They're highly volatile. Remittance flows are stable, counter-cyclical, resilient, and I don't see any way to keep them down in the future.
It's remarkable, and the figures themselves are remarkable. Can I just ask, in your data collection, does that include only money traveling through formal channels, or do you also estimate the flows of money through informal channels, which is quite common in some recruitment corridors as well?
Actually, the data that I cite, over $600 billion in 2021, expected to be over $630 billion in 2022. These are only recorded flows. These are officially recorded flows. So they do not really include informal flows, which we know is very, very significant. So with travel bans, a lot of people started sending money through informal channels. Some tried sending money through mobile money or through internet, but actually, when the flow of money going by hand carry and through third parties and not always being recorded is significant. It could be as high as another 50% of what we see. So we are looking at a total flow of over $1 trillion actually in remittance flows. So it's truly a lifeline to financial lifeline to poor countries.
No, exactly so. And actually, maybe that's my next question. So what impact do these remittances have on countries' GDP? And do these sort of positive numbers help countries gain financial sustainability? They
do. They really do, in the sense that the families that are receiving remittances, they are out of poverty. So poverty, the poverty headcount rate, the number of people below the poverty line, actually that number gets reduced when remittances come in. In fact, if you start thinking about it, people migrate to start with, not because they just want to go away. They actually migrate because they want to be able to send money home and help families. And that is exactly what happens. So remittances lift people out of poverty. They provide funding for the family for basic needs, food and shelter and clothing. They also provide funding for education for children, for healthcare for everyone, including maternal health. So overall, remittances are truly a force for good. And if you think about it, because money is being sent by a family member to to their own family, the money is well directed to the needs of the family and well timed for the needs of the family. That is why they tend to be resilient. They tend to be unexpectedly so, even during times of crisis, because migrants, even when they are losing a job or their salary or wages are going down during, let's say, COVID, they are willing to make sacrifices, cut consumption, share accommodation, and lower rent expenses so that they can send money home. That's the reason we see a lot of good coming out of these flows. They lift people out of poverty. And of course, at the global level, when a country like India receives $89 billion a year, more than double almost the size of foreign direct investment, when Mexico or Egypt or Nigeria receive remittances, in the case of Mexico, larger than oil exports, in the case of Nigeria, larger than oil exports, in the case of Egypt, maybe 7 times larger than the revenue from Suez Canal, it does have a huge impact on financial stability and ability of the country to manage its external financing needs.
Dilip, the numbers you quote are fantastic, aren't they? I was still working to the last figure I had was 589 billion, but you believe it's over 600 billion to low middle income countries now, and
Yes.
likely to increase even more.
Yes. So we produce these reports every 6 months, and we follow the data. We update the data every 6 months. So the last publicly available report was May, and that's where the numbers come from, the ones that I quoted. We will release new data actually very soon, next early November, maybe second week of November. And so I can't cite them right now, unfortunately.
No. But do you generally have a good idea about where remittances are heading? You can follow trends and other influences.
Yes, we do. It's just that whenever I predicted a downturn, I have been wrong. This is not a good situation to be in. And so somehow the resilience of migrants, their willingness to climb barriers, that's what it is in the end. No matter how high, they are willing to climb the barrier, and they keep sending money home no matter what. So I really look at the trajectory now, and this is my 20th year of following remittances. 20th year, 20 years of my life I have devoted to this now. And I'm surprised that with every other type of resource flows, I see downturns. With remittances, I really cannot foresee at all. I mean, we're talking about next 50 years, I don't think it will fall.
It's really interesting and fascinating figures. Tasneem, remittances are direct income primarily for village households, and recruitment costs often proves a deterrent and forces migrants to divert a considerable proportion of hard-earned money to intermediaries, usually in the sort of urban centres. And so we see this sort of movement of money from rural to urban and ultimately to cities, and as we've also talked about, ironically back to countries of destination. So the money almost does a circular route. But how do institutions like RUMRU and others work towards addressing this? What are the things that you as a civil society organisation and an academic research institute can do?
We have formed migrant rights protection committees in different parts of the country. These migrant rights protection committees are constituted by local level leaders, returnee migrants, female local representatives, school teachers, and others. What they do, they actually, try to identify who are the right kind of middlemen, and those right kind of middlemen, how they are linked with the official recruiting agencies and the visas that they are bringing into rural areas, if those visas are genuine visas. So these groups check through online sort of information, and then they also organize, mediation, arbitration, and court case against those who are committing this type of frauds against the migrants. And migrants who have returned as failed migrants, in those cases as well, negotiation with recruiting agencies and trying to, send them again to a different country or recouping the money that they have lost. So these are the things at the grassroots level many organizations are doing now. From the government part, I would say that if there was like this restriction, the type of money they put in, that they say that if the cost of migration should be under 100,000, 150,000 taka, but then migration should be zero cost. And even then, when they put this ceiling, they never make the recruiting agencies accountable that it should remain in that.
No,
we prepare cases for government and then take them to different government arbitration sessions and say, why don't you try to catch the recruiting agencies who have charged more than this? But there is an unholy alliance between functionaries and the recruiting agencies, and that not always produce the right kind of results. But even then, these interventions do reduce, fraudulence and cheating and charging extra. All these things, are reduced. So you see, in certain districts where NGOs are working, their, recruiting agencies doesn't want to go for recruitment. So they are finding new district, new areas. I think time has come through, we have developed a mobile app through which like all kinds of information ranging from financial literacy to where to go, all these are in the mobile app, and also they can put all their papers in that mobile app. And once if something happens in the countries of destination, they can get back to their data bank. So that type of effort are taking place in Bangladesh so that, this type of unfortunate situations can be reduced.
And it's access to information, however it's delivered by NGOs, but also increasingly delivered through a number of apps, and we're actually featuring a number of these apps at the Global Forum this year, so that's heartening to hear. I now want to talk specifically about women migrant workers. Do we see gender differentials in terms of recruitment costs in a country like Bangladesh? Do women migrant workers pay more or less to travel abroad than men? And what's the gendered reality of their migration experience?
Data shows that female migrants who choose to go abroad, who choose to cross border, their socioeconomic situation is much worse even than those who work internally, female migrants who go to work internally. So they are really from the bottom strata of the society, bottom economic strata of the society. But what is interesting, because there is a need for female migrants in specific areas, be it domestic work, be it manufacturing and garments and other industries, caregiving. So there is a niche, and for that, you do see the type of fraudulence that you see in case of male migrants, you do see them less, particularly in the area of, salary and payment and other things. And also because the Middle East and other countries require female migrants, so the cost is much lower. It is 1/4 of what male migrants pay. Not only that the cost is 1/4, also, recouping the cost, it takes 4 times less in case of female migrants. And earlier, male migrants used to remit like 200,000 and female migrant would remit around 85,000. So less than half. But that gap is reducing in the context of Bangladesh. So I would say certain changes are taking place in case of female migrants, but that doesn't mean that exploitation or sexual harassment or other things are less. They do face other types of problems. Now, there is this tendency of, not letting women to stay with the owners, employers. So they are into hostels. But what has happened during COVID, we have seen those who are staying in the house, they were getting salary, they could, pay, send remittance to the countries of origin. But those who were staying in hostels and working in 2-3 houses, they have lost their job and they were really in a very bad situation, food insecurity, and they couldn't come back, they couldn't return. So all these things are different diverse types of problem which are there. But at the same time, if we think of supporting female migration or doing certain thing for the female migrants, that would produce better results in future.
So one of the things that certain governments, and the government of Bangladesh has done this previously, is have bans on women traveling abroad for work, or bans into certain sectors and things like that. What's your opinion about such bans? Do you feel that they're effective, or do they just encourage women to migrate anyway, but just go through unsafe routes?
In fact, it is my work, my research that contributed in lifting the ban from female migrants, the advocacy work, as well as the research on female migration. So I am very much for, everyone has the right to choose, and female also have the right to choose to work abroad or in Bangladesh. Our role and government role is to protect them, not to stop them, not to take away their right, rather to protect them in the countries of destination. So ban and restriction never can bring in protected work environment, because then they take unsafe routes, and then trafficking was a major problem for Bangladesh at one point of time. You don't hear the cases of trafficking as high as before, because formal channel is now open. Women can migrate officially, and then certain protection measures are there in the countries of destination. Shelter homes are there, and then government labor attaches are particularly looking after the female migrants. So therefore, migration through formal channel and migration legally is a better option always compared to ban and restriction.
Thank you. And just finally on this, you mentioned earlier about, well, Dilip talked a lot about the financial benefits of migration abroad, but you were also talking about what we would maybe call social remittances, the gaining of new skills, knowledge, experience, and how is that empowering for women when they return to their communities, or is there still sometimes stigma attached to women who've migrated abroad for work? What's your view?
The thing is, when a woman returns, she has learned to live and take decision on her own. But once she returns, she's again in the patriarchal sort of structure. In that patriarchal structure, earlier, husband, fathers, they used to take decisions. So once they return, there is a conflict, there is a fight. Most of the women actually give this fight because they have learned to negotiate better. And what happens that they do in household decision making, they do participate, maybe in a different way than before, but they do participate. And then if you think, no, taking care of elderlies in a way, and as well as other social costs of migration, such as husbands staying abroad for a long time, but then looking after the household by the left behind female household members, all these actually changed gender perception, in respect to migration and the outcome of migration. So I would say that social cost of migration is high, but at the same time, social benefits of migration is also quite high.
Thank you. So, Dilip, Nomad's done some fantastic work related to migration and remittances, and you've given us some very impressive figures. And we know that developing countries are receiving over 600 billion US dollars as remittances, and that these migrant household transfers help hundreds of millions of workers. However, as we're discussing, a considerable portion of remittances are also going towards recruitment costs, especially in certain countries and certain recruitment corridors like India, Bangladesh, Nepal. My question to you is, do we have any method to know how much workers are paying as a recruitment cost and its real impact on remittance delivery?
Yes. Yes, we have a sustainable development goal indicator, number 10.7.1, an SDG indicator to lower worker paid recruitment costs. And ILO, International Labour Organization, together with Nomad and World Bank are co-custodians. So we monitor it closely. And we have developed the guidelines. So we do have some data, and more data are being collected. And we also rely on data that comes out from Ramru, from Tasneem's group as well. Now, some anecdotal data based on surveys, actual surveys, but they still remain methodologically insufficient, I would say. And because of that, I say anecdotal. The anecdotal point to widespread abuse of the recruitment process and the amount of fees that migrant workers end up paying, let's say workers from Bangladesh or Pakistan, Nepal, India as well. The amount that they pay to labor agents, and all of that is illegal, can be as high as $3,000, like Tasneem was mentioning that, or $5,000, $7,000 sometimes. And these are for jobs that in the GCC countries, let's say in UAE, Saudi Arabia, would pay about $200 a month, meaning that the upfront fees that these people are paying to labor agents, and all of it is illegal, can be as high as 24 months, 36 months, 72 months of expected wages. So for the first 2 years, 3 years, 6 years of migration, these migrants are just sending money home just to pay back the fees. And often they have borrowed money from moneylenders at 3% per month, meaning 36% interest rate per year, or 50% interest rate per year. Again, the implication is that the amount they would earn will not cover even the interest fees. And they just did not know about this. So this is one phenomenon that we know about. It is widespread. More work needs to be done to collect the data. On the other side, because there are no proper legal migration channels, opportunities, not enough visas are available, let's say in the North American corridors or in European corridors, then migration from Africa or from South America and the Caribbean, Latin America and the Caribbean to Europe or to the US often takes the form of illegal migration, irregular migration. So they use the smugglers, the coyotes, and they then pay similar fees. So we have anecdotal data again on smuggling fees. So these days after COVID and the COVID-related travel bans and enforcement of borders that began, smuggling fees are now gone up to, from Mexico to the US, around $10,000 per person, $10,000 per person, right? So yes, we have data on that. And as Tasneem pointed out, when people send money to pay back these recruitment agents, that takes away from the family. The money that would have gone to feed the children and support the family is now going for something else, and all of that is illegal. So it is a low-hanging fruit for the global community to reduce these fees. And not going to be easy because there are criminal elements involved, and these criminals are not alone. Obviously, they are getting the support from officials as well all over the world. So there is that importance that one can attach to the SDG indicator 10.7.1 to reduce worker paid recruitment costs. And I would be happy to elaborate on a couple of things that can be done to reduce these fees.
So Dilip, what measures would you like to see to increase the development potential of remittances? How can those costs, do you believe, be minimized? Is there a role for big financial institutions here? Is it a role of government? What would your solutions be?
So we on remittances, to maximize the developmental impact, first step is to actually increase the flows and facilitate the flow of remittances. I'll also talk about recruitment costs, but first on the remittance flows itself, there is the need to reduce remittance costs. So people pay to send money to Africa about 8% or more of the amount that they send. So the smaller the amount, the larger the cost. So it's highly regressive in that sense. Poorer
so
people,
this is a transfer cost, a money transfer cost.
money transfer cost. Money transfer cost for cross-border international money transfers tends to be very high. And in particular, so in the case of sending money to Africa. And then within Africa, 2/3 of migrants in sub-Saharan Africa are in other sub-Saharan African countries. It is intra-regional migration that is about 2/3 of total international migration from sub-Saharan Africa. And intra-regional remittances within Africa is very, very significant, very large. And yet sending money to one African country from another African country can easily cost you 12%, 15%, 20%. So there is that need to reduce the cost of sending money from the global north to the global south, but there is also the need to reduce the cost of sending money from the global south to the global south, and even more so. What can be done to reduce costs? Increase competition in the remittance markets. There is an oligopolistic market structure, monopolistic market structure, and improving competition by reducing barriers to entry for new players coming in with technology, cheaper cost structures. They can bring down the cost almost instantaneously. But there is one roadblock that prevents that, and that is the regulations governing our efforts to fight money laundering, to combat the financing of terror or terrorism. And those AML-CFT, anti-money laundering and the countering of financing of terror regulations are a huge roadblock to adoption of new technology, entry of new players into the market. Because what happens is that even when a mobile phone operator, for example, wants to get into this with very cheap structure, cost structure, it is not able to get a correspondent banking license from a major international bank. And the correspondent banks have to be there to transfer money from one country to another country, from one currency to another country. So the correspondent banks have become very wary of the AML-CFT regulations and the fines that may come because of non-compliance or perceived non-compliance. And that has meant that a lot of money transfer companies, those who were already operational, several hundred of them have closed down. New players are not able to enter, and new technology is not being introduced into this market. So there is much to be done on that. There is another low-hanging fruit, which is that the national post office systems in most of the countries in the world have exclusive partnership with one or the other large money transfer company. So when there is an exclusive partnership with a money transfer company, a part of the fee, a part of the remittance fee is actually collected by the source country government. Another part of the fee is collected by the recipient country government. And that is not different from a tax on remittances. So you cannot have a sustainable development goal indicator, 10.C.1, to reduce remittance costs to 3% by 2030. You cannot have a goal to reduce remittance costs and at the same time partner with another money transfer company and charge a tax essentially on remittances, which is increases. It's a left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing. So those are two key things. Recognize small remittances as not money laundering and do away with exclusive partnerships and become inclusive in partnerships between national post offices, national banks, and money transfer companies. These are two key things on recruitment costs.
Thank you.
And remittance costs, on remittance costs.
Tasneem, just developing that further, how important is financial literacy and maybe access to financial services for migrant workers and their families? How can workers often from quite impoverished backgrounds be encouraged to budget their hard-earned remittances to maximize the benefits?
Financial literacy is important, but before that, I would like to say that those who migrate and also, those who are in the country of origin, they do have certain knowledge base based on which they operate. They do the cost benefit calculation and then they decide to migrate. No? So in a way, certain knowledge they have, but then those knowledges, through those knowledges, if you want to produce positive economic outcomes, that is where you require certain specialized sort of training, skills development, business advisory services, and all these, if we bracket under financial literacy, it is important. But more important will be to come up with avenues, investment avenues, which people can utilize, and then, matching those investment avenues with the financial literacy knowledge that are required will produce the result. Because when you compare migrant population with non-migrant population, bank account is much higher in case of migrant population. Then investment into non sort of household expenditure. If you think innovation in agriculture, using new technology, opening stores of operating technological things. So those things are higher in case of migrant households compared to non-migrant households. So therefore, in those cases, the specialized knowledge is required to help them.
I understand. We're getting near to the end of our discussion now, and I think that our conversation's been quite wide-ranging and certainly illuminating, certainly about the sums that we're talking about and the figures that are being remitted. But as we try and wrap up, I think let's try and be specific, and I'll allow you two things each. What are the two things that each of you would like people listening to this conversation to take away from this discussion? Dilip, let's start with you. What are the two things that you would like people to take away from this conversation?
Well, the first point I would make is a plea that remittances provide a financial lifeline to the poor people and poor countries, and we must recognize that small remittances are not money laundering. They are a force for good, and that would unleash more goodness out of these flows. That is my first point. The second point is that to make to harness diaspora resources or resources that come from migrants, including on remittances, one complementary product that has not been exploited enough or tapped enough in the world is diaspora savings and diaspora investments. And there are formal ways of doing it, and we have not done that. And that can be done by issuing, let's say, diaspora bonds, selling retail bonds in small denominations to diaspora members, migrants in foreign countries. And those bond proceeds can be used at home for longer term, predictable financing, cheaper cost financing of development projects and programs. That can go a long ways in complementing development financing that exists currently. And I expect that diaspora savings are over $500 billion, and we can easily tap 1/10 of that, which would be about $50 billion. That's like 1/3 or maybe 1/4 of the total development aid annually that is flowing. So I would say that countries ought to explore diaspora bonds for development financing.
That sounds like a really interesting idea, and certainly one that would be worth exploring. Tasneem, what would be the two things that you would like people to
I would talk about gender, and what we see that certain changes are taking place when women are migrating, and which is traditionally we always see that women migration, stigmatized, then not really, they are exploited, so those are the main issues discussed. But what recent studies are showing that the cost of migration for male is 4 times higher than female, what they incur. And also income differences are continuously reducing between male and female migrants. So in case of Bangladesh, now the income of male migrant is 1.4 times higher compared to female migrants. And remittances as well. Female migrants' remittances are increasing, and the gap between male and female are decreasing. Therefore, only the gap is now 1.2 times. Again, if we look what needs to be done in this respect, instead of thinking of exploitation and other things has to be taken care of, but then market management also should be taken care of. Now, women only participate in 3 major job markets, whereas market of the male migrants are diversified compared to the female migrants. And these are the areas, if we work a little bit more into governing female migration, I think that will produce better result, because there is a need for female migrants in the countries of destination. So this is one. And the other thing I would say, in this whole discussion of migration has to be broadened. We now need to bring internal migration as well, and internal migrants' remittances as one of the development, enhancing outcome, and the type of policies, actions that we have on international migration, that has to be commensurated with policies in internal migration as well.
And that obviously will become ever more important as we begin to see the impacts of climate change on countries, and I'm sure that a country like Bangladesh is a good example of the increased movement that we're likely to see of people brought about by both environmental but also economic shocks caused by the climate crisis. I'd like to just wrap up now, and our conversation this afternoon has been wide-ranging. I think that what's really significant is the large amounts that migrant workers are remitting to their home countries, and the impacts or the potential impacts of that on development outcomes. I think that we're all aware of how we might be able to sort of increase the impact of remittances through fair and ethical recruitment, but also, as Dilip said, trying to reduce the charging that workers face in money transfer costs back to home countries. So plenty of potential there to use employment and transnational and internal migration of workers to enhance and improve development outcomes. I'd like to thank our speakers this afternoon, Dilip Ratha and Tasneem Siddiqui. Thank you very much. And I would urge attendees to certainly have a look at the Nomad website. It's a wealth of really interesting information about money transfers across all sorts of recruitment corridors, and you can actually find really useful and interesting data there. So we'd encourage you to visit that site. Thank you again to my speakers. Thank you for watching, and goodbye. And please do check out some of the other sessions that we have looking at government processes and development outcomes for migrant workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.